What do you call a country that pumps water uphill across deserts, defying gravity, war, and physics itself? In one of the driest places on Earth, Israel has built a $20 billion water highway that didn't just solve scarcity, it turned it into geopolitical power. This is the story of how pipes, politics, and pressure reshaped the Middle East. When Israel declared its independence in 1948, its fiercest battle wasn't just against invading armies, it was against the land itself. Over 60% of the country was desert. Rainfall was sparse and unpredictable. There weren't any lush river systems like the Nile or the Tigris to rely on. Israel had the Jordan River, a narrow, contested stretch of water that barely sustained the people already living near it. In those early days, water wasn't just scarce, it was a daily crisis. Showers were rationed, crops died under the relentless sun, entire towns survived on timed water deliveries, and any growth, whether in population, agriculture, or industry, was tied to a vanishing resource. The Negev Desert, which made up more than half the country, was essentially off-limits for development. To make things worse, geopolitical tensions made water sharing with neighboring countries nearly impossible. Rivers were being diverted upstream, borders were shifting, and the young nation found itself with no choice but to rely on what little it had beneath its feet: small, shrinking aquifers. Israel had no oil wealth, no major rivers, and very little international support, but it had one thing: a stubborn determination to survive. If it couldn't find water, it would have to create it, pushing the limits of engineering, science, and sheer willpower. With no rivers to rely on and aquifers running dry, Israel was staring down the barrel of a future without water. But in the midst of this looming crisis, one engineer dared to imagine the impossible. Simcha Blas, a quiet genius with a stubborn streak, had a radical idea. Why not move water against gravity? Pull it from the Sea of Galilee in the north and pump it hundreds of kilometers south, through rocky hills, barren land, and blistering heat, until it reaches the Negev Desert. Not just a pipe, but a nationwide water highway. To most, it sounded like science fiction. The elevation gains were enormous. The logistics were frankly insane. Critics scoffed that Israel didn't have the energy, the money, or the technology. But David Ben-Gurion, Israel's first prime minister, didn't care. He wasn't looking for what was easiest, he was chasing what was necessary. He believed that if Israel could make the desert bloom, it could truly become independent. So he gave the green light. And from that vision rose the National Water Carrier, a 130-kilometer network of tunnels, reservoirs, pressurized pipelines, and massive pumping stations. Construction began in the late 1950s and continued into the 60s. It was, at the time, the most ambitious infrastructure project in the Middle East. Adjusted for inflation, it cost the equivalent of over $20 billion. But here's the thing, it actually worked. And when the water finally flowed south, it didn't just irrigate the desert, it redrew the map and rewrote Israel's destiny. The moment water began flowing through the National Water Carrier, it was clear. This wasn't just a pipe, it was a declaration. For Israel, it meant survival, but for its neighbors, it looked like a power grab. The ability to move vast quantities of water across the country didn't just solve Israel's thirst, it gave it leverage. And in the Middle East, leverage can be dangerous. By the early 1960s, Syria and Jordan began taking countermeasures. They launched projects to divert the Jordan River upstream, choking off Israel's water source before it even reached the Sea of Galilee. Palestinian factions even attempted sabotage attacks on pumping stations and exposed pipelines. Suddenly, the water highway wasn't just infrastructure, it was a military target. Tensions escalated, and by 1967, water had become one of the many sparks that ignited the Six-Day War. It's rarely mentioned in textbooks, but control over water and fear of losing it were a driving force behind the conflict. Israel responded decisively. It buried key sections of the pipeline, reinforced stations with concrete bunkers, and deployed soldiers to patrol the route. Water security became national security. The national water carrier, once a symbol of hope, had become a battleground. In the Middle East, water isn't just a basic right, it's a strategic resource, one worth fighting for, and one that can tip the balance of power in a region where every drop counts. For decades, the national water carrier kept Israel alive, but just barely. By the early 2000s, the cracks were showing. The population had tripled, rainfall was dropping year after year, and climate change was pushing natural water sources to the brink. The miracle pipe that once saved the country was now falling short. So Israel did what it's done since day one. It adapted. But this time, the pivot was even bolder. If nature didn't provide the water, Israel would create its own. The country launched the world's most ambitious desalination program, transforming salty seawater from the Mediterranean into fresh, drinkable water on an industrial scale. Giant coastal plants, Ashkelon, Sorek, and Hadera, rose like futuristic fortresses, turning the ocean into an oasis. Today, these mega plants produce over 600 million cubic meters of water each year. That's not just enough to meet demand, it actually exceeds it. Israel now has more water than it needs. But they didn't just stop there. Israel also became the leader in wastewater recycling, treating and reusing over 85% of its sewage, mostly for agriculture. In comparison, the US recycles less than 10%. The old water highway was reborn, and now instead of just moving water from Galilee, it links into a high-tech grid of desalinated flows and recycled streams. It's no longer a pipeline, it's a smart water network. Today, 70% of Israel's water comes from artificial sources. In just a few decades, Israel went from desperate to dominant. It didn't just solve water scarcity, it redefined what was possible. Solving your own water crisis is one thing. Solving everyone else's, that's when you become a superpower. After mastering desalination and wastewater recycling, Israel found itself with an unexpected problem: too much water. And in a region defined by scarcity, that surplus became something more powerful than oil or gas: diplomatic leverage. Israel began exporting water to Jordan, helping supply hundreds of thousands of people through cross-border agreements. It also supports Palestinian water infrastructure, albeit with tension and criticism over distribution rights. Even Egypt has tapped into Israeli water tech for desert agriculture. In a region where political cooperation is pretty rare, water became the neutral ground, a reason to meet, negotiate, and sign deals. One of the boldest ideas: the proposed Red Sea-Dead Sea Canal, a joint venture between Israel, Jordan, and Palestine. The plan is ambitious: pump Red Sea water inland, desalinate it for human use, and send the leftover brine to replenish the rapidly shrinking Dead Sea, while generating hydropower along the way. This isn't just engineering, it's ecological healing tied to regional diplomacy. And Israeli influence doesn't just stop at its borders. Its companies now export drip irrigation, desalination tech, and water management systems to countries across the globe, from India and China to Kenya and California. In just 70 years, Israel transformed from a nation rationing showers to one quenching deserts worldwide. This isn't just a success story, it's a blueprint for how water can become the foundation of peace and power. Turning seawater into a weapon of diplomacy sounds like a miracle, and in many ways it kind of is. But even miracles come with a price tag. While Israel's water mastery has earned global praise, the cracks beneath the surface are starting to show. Desalination is extremely energy hungry. Every drop of fresh water pulled from the sea requires vast amounts of electricity, and Israel's grid is under growing strain. As demand rises, so does the risk of blackouts or supply interruptions. And then there's the environmental blowback. Desalination produces brine, super salty wastewater which is pumped back into the Mediterranean. Marine scientists are raising alarms about its impact on coastal ecosystems, which are already fragile from climate change and overfishing. And speaking of climate, even this advanced system isn't future-proof. Hotter summers and longer droughts could force desalination plants to work harder, burning more energy and demanding more maintenance. Meanwhile, aging infrastructure from the 1960s, like parts of the original national water carrier, constantly needs upgrading. But perhaps the most delicate issue? Unequal access. While Israeli cities thrive on high-tech water systems, rural and Palestinian communities often experience shortages, delayed repairs, and limited infrastructure. That inequality doesn't just cause frustration, it breeds resentment. If a desalination plant shuts down, even briefly, Israel would need emergency reserves to avoid a crisis. It's a reminder that technology can solve a lot of things, but it can't replace policy, equity, and trust. Water may now be abundant in Israel, but keeping it flowing fairly and sustainably might be the hardest challenge yet. Israel's water revolution came with costs, environmental, political, and moral. But it also came with something the world desperately needs: a working example. Because Israel isn't alone in this kind of crisis. Today, more than 2 billion people live in regions facing serious water stress. From the drought-stricken farmlands of California to the nearly dry reservoirs of Cape Town, climate change is pushing fragile water systems to the edge. And here's where Israel's story flips from exceptional to essential. It proves that scarcity doesn't have to lead to collapse. It can lead to creativity. Desperation can birth innovation, but only if governments are bold enough to act before the panic hits. No, not every country can spend $20 billion to move water uphill through deserts, but every country can prioritize efficiency, invest in recycling, modernize old infrastructure, and push policy beyond politics. It's not just about engineering, it's about planning, persistence, and courage. The world is entering an age where water is power, and those who fail to act now may pay the price later. So the real question is, will we wait for catastrophe or start building like our lives depend on it? Because as Israel has shown, the future won't be written in oil or gold. It'll be written in water. And that's about it. If you like this video, give it a thumbs up. And if you like more updates, subscribe to our channel. Don't forget to click on the bell icon so you don't miss any future videos and get your notifications on time. Don't hesitate to give suggestions for our videos. See you in the next one.